Hi everybody, it's the CCJT Amateur Hour where production values go to die. We're just checking here to make sure all our electronics are going. Are all our electronics going?
I think so.
Okay. Production values go to... Okay, this is the CCJT Amateur Hour. I said that. It is December 7th.
Saturday.
We're doing this on a Saturday because our Sunday filled up.
Yes.
At the last minute. So we've got things we got to take care of on Sunday. So we're doing this on Saturday, a day early, but still the great, awesome quality that you've come to expect on a Sunday podcast.
Of our award-winning Sunday podcast.
You have to get award-winning in a lot. Okay, so over there is CC.
And over there is JT.
And what you have here, of course, as always, is two self-published writers of a certain age trying to share their experiences and thoughts on varied topics related to writing.
Yes.
Because our mission is to help writers write. We practiced that.
We didn't.
No, we didn't.
One brain cell.
One brain cell. I think we have a pretty interesting topic today. But as always, we start off with current events.
Yep.
Current events, and so how's it going with your current events?
My book is coming along. I actually reopened it after taking a break for a few days because it was time to decorate the house for Christmas.
Yes. You notice the prevalence of red.
Lots of red.
By the way, go pack.
Yes.
Okay.
Back the pack.
Back the pack.
And that's Nevada Wolf Pack, in case you're not aware. Anyway, so I reopened it after decorating most of the house for Christmas, and I'm somewhat satisfied with how it's going. I'm cleaning it up. It's something that I brought a couple versions together into one, so I want to make sure everything's coherent. So I think it's coming along, and hopefully I'll have it ready for beta readers fairly soon.
Excellent. I've got 3 works going at the same time.
Juggler.
Zoe, the one that I've been teasing for a very long time, is going through its end round of edits. I keep saying that, but that's where it is. It's getting close to its end round of edits, and it'll be released in 2025. Book 2 of the Serving Salvation series is at the editors. It's at the editors. And
it's in round 1 of edits.
It's in the round 1 of edits.
Yep.
And the prequel to Serving Salvation, which is called Finding Salvation, the Finding Salvation prequels is also at the editors.
Is in a later round of edits.
It's in a later round of edits. So the book 2 of this series is at the beginning.
Yep.
The prequel is in the middle.
Yep.
And Zoe is at the end. So
Juggler. Also, Serving Salvation book 2 will be a full-size novel.
Right.
Finding Salvation will be 3 novellas.
Mm-hmm.
So around 35,000 words?
35, yeah, around that.
Or so. So they're going to be interspersed in between books 1 through 3 of Serving Salvation.
Right. And it's just, I found the reason I did that is because I enjoyed building in the universe, and it was just fun to do all that. So it was just fun.
Yep.
That's all. Okay.
Yeah. So we're busy.
So that's the way it is with writing, and I can't think of anything. Do we want to talk about anything more about writing?
Tomorrow, one of the things that will be taking up at least part of my day is that I'm going to the December meeting of the Sierra Arts Literary Community in Reno. Mm-hmm. So we will be doing a white elephant gift exchange, which
and man, whoever gets the gift she picked out is for $15, it's pretty cool.
Yes, and it's definitely something that will appeal to at least some writers in the group, because I think it's something that all of us use at some point. But so that will be taking up part of my day, and we are trying to be more involved in the Sierra Arts Foundation and the Sierra Arts Literary Community, because we're finding that it's a good network, and some of JT's books are actually in their Depot Gallery bookstore in Sparks. So through the Sierra Arts Foundation, they have a gallery and bookstore. So if you're in Northern Nevada, if you're looking for Christmas gifts, they are open actually I think this weekend they're having an event.
Yeah. So
where the Depot Gallery is open. So you can find JT's book, Sheriff in Nevada there. There are a couple of copies autographed with a nice little gold foil sticker on them.
And lots of other quality writers too.
Definitely.
Lots of other quality. Really?
Yes. Yes, I think you can find a variety of genres. So whatever suits your tastes.
Right.
And there are a lot of great writers in Northern
Yeah,
Nevada.
it's humbling to be numbered among them.
Yep.
Because there's just so much fantastic talent in Northern Nevada. So it's like, as Cece said, track down the bookstore in Sparks.
Yep.
You called it the Depot.
It's the Depot Gallery Bookstore.
Depot Gallery Bookstore. Just wander on by there and support local artists.
Yes.
Support local artists.
So I think aside from that, we're just writing and editing and getting ready for our big 2025 because we're even though we're really busy, we're taking a little breather because things are about to really take off.
Yeah, and we're going to save that for a future episode because, all these plans that we've been making is just going to, boom, 2025. So,
yep. So, stay tuned. If you've been following along, continue to follow us because things may change a little bit and it's going to get interesting.
Okay, we're going to dive into today's topic, and honestly, in the 27 minutes that we have left, we generally like to stick to, we call it the hour.
Amateur hour.
We call it the amateur hour, but we tend to keep it around 30 minutes because when we do the video part of it, it makes it easier for everybody, especially, and TikTok only allows 30 minutes anyway. But if we run over on this one, so there won't be a TikTok, but there will be the YouTube, and there will be the Spotify and Apple and other podcasts. And it may be easy for us to run over. So if you see me waving at CC, numbers like this or something like that, that's because we're trying to time it here. We may be ignoring that today because today is a complex topic. Today is a very complex topic for writers. So last week was episode 200. Today is episode 201. So I got this inspiration. And you've already seen what that inspiration is. If we're going to do episode 201, let's talk about 2001, A Space Odyssey. Mm-hmm. A movie that just almost, I want to say, should have had the impact of Star Wars. Should have had the impact of Star Wars, but I don't think it did. But it still was a groundbreaking, an amazing movie that was released. So. It was released before we walked on the moon.
Yes, the year before.
It was released in 1968, so, and of course we're going to talk about spoilers, but if, this movie...
it doesn't really matter in 2001.
It's, 55 years old now.
Yes.
It's 55 years old now, so we're going to spoil a 55-year-old movie.
56.
If you haven't seen it, and you get upset because of spoilers, then you might want to turn off now. But we're going to spoil it at length because it was such an amazing movie, and it holds up. It holds
up really well.
It holds up, not just because of the effects, not because of the direction, but because of the ideas of the evolution of man and man's place in the universe. Or I should say, forgive me, I guess that was exclusive. I should say humanity's place in the universe. And so here we are. If you follow along, this is when it came out was, we were young people, very young, mm-hmm. and we saw it in real theaters. I remember the theater that I saw it in, though I don't think I saw it then. I think I saw it during the re-release during the 70s. Mm. But it was in the Century Theater, which is now in the parking lot, the parking garage
of the
Peppermill.
So it was the dome.
It was the big dome.
Oh, but where we saw Star Trek with the kids.
Yeah,
wasn't it
something like that? I don't know.
One of the later Star Trek movies. It might have been maybe Generation. No, it wasn't Generation. Anyway.
So many movies.
I was thinking about it, and the movie came out in 1968. I grew up in California, and coincidentally, you mentioned Star Wars. At the time, I was living in Modesto, where George Lucas was from. Mm-hmm. So I probably would have seen that movie at the Briggsmore Theater because my dad took me. My dad, huge sci-fi fan. He probably gave me my love of sci-fi plus my love of roller coasters. So I do remember seeing it in the theater at 5 years old, and this movie was an interesting brain exercise for adults. As a 5-year-old, Oh my God.
So,
no understanding.
So we're going to talk very quickly about the structure of the movie, and if you're used to theater or anything like that, things in modern, on television are generally in 3 acts. This movie has 4 acts. It has the Dawn of Man.
Yep.
It has the Moon sequence. It has the Jupiter sequence, and then it has the Starchild sequence.
Right.
And so the Dawn of Man sequence is open. Just very quickly, the Dawn of Man sequence opens with. I don't want to say apes, but something like that. The precursors to humanoid,
yeah,
more ape-like than humans, but events happen.
Hominids, maybe?
Pardon me?
Would it be hominids? Would that
Something
be correct?
like
Something
that.
like that.
Yeah. And then they do an act with a weapon, which unfortunately is accurate about when it comes to man. And then it segues smoothly to the moon. The journey to the space station, and then the journey to the moon, and then the discovery of the obelisk.
Yes.
The obelisk. Is that the right word for
monolith.
it? Monolith.
It's the monolith.
Thank you.
Yes.
I knew it was an obelisk. It was monolith.
Yes.
The discovery of the monolith, which was programmed that it was when it was uncovered to send out a radio signal to Jupiter. And so next act is the journey from the moon. The journey to Jupiter. And of course, Hal, the very, very famous computer, and then the sequence of events where Hal murders the crew, but doesn't quite get there, and Frank survives. And then the last act, he evolves after encountering the monolith around Jupiter, and evolves into the Starchild. And I did that like a 2-minute, 3-minute summary, and I did not.
It's a 2.5, 3 hour movie. It's a long movie.
It's
a very long movie.
I did not do it justice.
I don't know that you can do it justice, because we mentioned in a previous episode, or I did, something about movies being very dialogue driven. 2001 is not heavily dialogue driven.
No.
The sequence where they're actually interacting with Hal basically is a majority of the dialogue, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the early creature evolution, whatever you want to call it, of the human race is pre-linguistic.
Mm-hmm.
So there are guttural grunts and things like that, but it's not what we would term a language. So it's not heavily dialogue driven. The music is a big part of this movie, and a lot of classical pieces of music were used to help drive the story along. And seeing it in the theater, I guess probably when I originally saw it, I don't think there was surround sound yet, but even having that quality of speakers versus watching it at home was a huge deal. And there are movies that are meant to be seen in the theater. I think 2001 is one of those.
Yeah, and I want to drop back into dialogue driven, and I may sound like an old crotchety person like when I say this, but I don't know if 2001 could be made today because it wasn't dialogue driven, because. The example of this is another sci-fi great, is Blade Runner, where the studio insisted that there be a narration track to Blade Runner because they wanted people to understand what was going on, and they didn't assume the audience had a brain, whereas Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke, and their colleagues, who did a wonderful job on this movie, it's a great movie, assumed that the audience had a brain. And so, they did not make it dialogue driven. I mean, there's this very little snippet here after Hal that is deactivated, and it explains why. There's a little film explaining why Hal is acting the way he is. I think it's important to know too that Ray Bradbury's robotic laws, were not in play. Were not even mentioned, but kind of implied, but not implied in this. Whereas, robots will not behave in a manner that hurts humans.
Right.
Whereas Hal just goes ahead and murders them for the higher cause of the mission. The mission must go through, and the human, crew, passengers, whatever you want to say, are murdered for that higher cause.
So it's basically going back to the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Or, in this instance, I think it's the flip. The needs of the mission outweighs the needs of the many.
But my assumption is that the mission is theoretically supposed to advance the many over the people who are performing the mission being the few, they become expendable.
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to the beginning, where at the beginning where the apes, for lack of a better word, they murder someone, and then Hal murders a whole bunch of them.
Right.
So it's in a way this is also a statement of saying how far we haven't traveled. They are millions of miles away from Earth when Hal is doing these acts, and thousands and thousands and thousands of years since that first murder. Not much difference. Murder is murder.
Humanity is humanity, and basically those human instincts, survival, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Personal survival versus the survival of your rival.
Yeah.
And that goes into play with the mission. It's that, these small group of people doesn't need to survive. It's the overall kind of evolution of the human race that's more important.
But, okay, so I think we've pretty much talked about the 4 acts.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about how they, I don't want to say seamlessly, because especially for between the 3rd act, which is the trip to Jupiter. That was good.
The trip to Jupiter. The trip to Jupiter.
And
Jupiter?
And the evolution to the Starchild. Frank goes through this gateway, and it's
trippy,
and it's like it's like, man, you have to be drunk to okay, never mind. But still, it's a kaleidoscope of colors and energy and light and sound, and it was just amazing. But when we were researching 2001 this morning, we made the note that, of course, that when Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick were putting this together, it was 2001 was based on a series of stories called The Sentinel. Mm-hmm. that Clarke had written, and that he had pulled it all together. Mm-hmm. And then as the movie was progressing, he was writing the book.
Yes.
So both were happening at the same time. I wonder if I seem to have heard a story that Mario Puzo did something similar with The Godfather, which only came out a few years later. Because I've read the book extensively, and it follows the movie almost exactly. Mm-hmm. But 2001, the book and 2001, the movie was a result of a series of short stories, and the movie sort of gives that impression of this is what happened then, this is what happened in this story, this was happened in this
vignettes
story. And the strength to that is each of the 4 acts is very strong. Each of the 4 acts is very strong. Like, for example, the 1st act, as we said, you said it is not dialogue driven.
No, not at all.
There's no dialogue.
Not anything that we would understand as dialogue. As I mentioned, there were guttural noises, which may be the early evolution of language, but it's not anything that people watching the movie would understand to be language. So it was communication of some form.
But visually, if you were to read it in a book, it would make total sense. It would make total sense because Sir Arthur wrote the book, and so he would describe the action, of course, of the creatures, approaching the kill, approaching mm-hmm. the waterhole, one group wanting it more than the other, and so it would be an interesting writing exercise to describe that. Mm-hmm. And of course we're writers, so but this is an instance where, especially in the writing version, where dialogue does not move the plot.
This is true.
Action moves the plot.
Now that you mention that, thinking back, I have not seen 2001 in quite a while now. I watched it multiple times after seeing it in the theater the first time. So I remember the opening scene as being somewhat dark. Mm-hmm. It's a sparse, barren landscape, kind of. Mm-hmm. It's rocky. I feel like mm-hmm. it's a lot of soil, not a lot of foliage or anything.
Things that Sir Arthur would have, detailed in the book.
So my visual memory of watching this was that it was very barren and stark, and they're trying to survive in this stark environment, which, living in Nevada, we understand because you drive a few miles out of town here, and we have a somewhat similar landscape. But describing that, we've talked about that mm-hmm. in writing Nevada, is what details do you include? So, mentioning the rocky outcroppings, mentioning the dusty soil, mm-hmm. mentioning any small bit of vegetation, which would have been something that the humanoids, hominids, whatever you want to call them, would need to survive. And you mentioned a watering hole. So in an environment like that, a watering hole becomes gold.
Mm-hmm.
It is vital to the survival of these creatures, for lack of a better term. So I remember visually watching this, and even as a 5-year-old, seeing, I grew up in lush California vegetation, so it was very different from my experience.
And which is fun about the movie, and which is probably fun about the stories and everything, is that it shifts from this very basic, primordial existence, where man is starting to make that evolution to become Homo sapien. Then we go into space.
Yes.
And it's like you're enraptured by the opera. You're enraptured by the ballet of the spaceship docking with the space station, and you can't help but think that look how far we have come, from the time that we were murdering with bones of carcasses to this delicate ballet of space docking and music, wonderful music, and then the technology of the space station itself, where somebody sits down at a chair and talks to his daughter via video phone, something that we do, of course.
Which was a big deal then.
Which was a big deal, but which is common right now, of course. And it's and so you cannot help to think, look how wonderful and amazing and advanced we become, and then a few minutes later, Hal kills everybody.
But then thinking about that, so we've gone to the stark, barren landscape of Earth before the evolution of civilization. So we get this evolution to space, but you think about everything outside of the space station is a harsh, stark environment that humans cannot survive without the technology. So it's an advancement, but it's also, we're still in the early phases of discovering, I guess, our abilities and our survival, because it does coincide a little bit with the early dawn of man situation, that it's another dawn for man. We're still not quite where we should be, but it's a step along the way.
And along those lines, is later in this particular act, they go to the moon, and they go into, here it comes, folks, another hole. Before we talked about a watering hole, now we talk about another hole that's been dug out to uncover the monolith.
Yes.
But on their journey to the monolith, it's another stark, barren landscape that man cannot survive in unless he has a great amount of help. And folks, this was 1968, so the film was being developed in 65, 66, 67. This is before the moon landings of 1969.
Yes.
So, they were I don't want to say they were winging it, because they used NASA consultants on this film, and they used renowned scientists, respected scientists, to pull it all together. But they pretty much hit it out of the park. I'm sure there's noise that, folks that specialize in, orbital mechanics and lunar science and stuff like that would probably be nitnoy. But, we had not touched the face of the moon by this time. We had not touched, and we had only had a few dozen trips to space in itself. So the power of imagination, going from this barren landscape on Earth to this complex super movie set, but super movie set that is another version of the barren earthen landscape. It is pretty interesting and pretty amazing. It must have been pretty much fun to try to figure out. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall of these production meetings to figure out how they were going to do all this.
Yes, and there are a probably decent amount of conspiracy theorists out there who may say that, that movie set was used for the moon landing. Oh yeah,
that's the running joke that Kubrick filmed the moon landing, but because he spent so much, and believe me, this was big budget. He spent so much, he wanted on location shooting. So it's like.
So thinking about that and how accurate the moon looked in 2001, despite the fact that we hadn't touched the moon yet, that reminds me of a very early 20th century, I believe, movie or small short film or something. I think it was a Jules Verne story, From the Earth to the Moon, where you see the rocket and it basically, so Smashing Pumpkins used it.
Smashing Pumpkins
and used clips or did an homage to it. So you compare that from the early 20th century with what happened in the just past midpoint of the century, there was quite the evolution in filmmaking also and storytelling. So it's we are not only talking about it throughout the course of the movie, but we're seeing it in real time through the movie itself, the evolution of what we've learned in the filmmaking industry.
So, the monolith is uncovered, the sun strikes it, and it generates a radio signal that goes out to Saturn. And so we move into Act 3, which is...
Is it Saturn or Jupiter?
Jupiter. And then, then we move on to the voyage of the Discovery, and the eventual murders of the crew, except for Frank. But it's still, and we get another testimony, and I said this earlier, we get another testimony that humanity has not evolved because, and honestly, it was probably an unintended outcome of the programmers of HAL that making the mission, and the way that it was designed is HAL could not tell the astronauts on board that he was programmed that way.
Right.
And we call it he because there's this very touching scene, which we're not going to go into, but pretty much, but that must have been a real trip to write. But my point being is we intentionally murder, and then we have unintentional consequences when we use blinders to laser focus on outcomes. I mean, why keep the purpose of the mission a secret from the astronauts? Well, let me put this, the astronauts who are awake.
So...
Oh, I'm sorry, let me just clarify that. Because there were several astronauts that were in cryogenic sleep. And they probably were aware of what the mission was because... Maybe. I would say probably, because they were scientists and everything like that. So they were probably aware. But there were two astronauts that were awake. And one was just outright murdered. But the question is why not tell them? Who are they going to tell? I mean, they're millions of miles from Earth, and their radio broadcasts back to Earth are heavily monitored because it's a plot device. Right. Because it's a plot device. Anyway, I'm sorry, I stepped on what you were going to say.
Well, my thought with that is that those humans, so the computer HAL has taken over the role of the evolving human race. The humans themselves are the tools. They're the bones. Yeah. So what do they need to know? Yeah. You don't tell them anything because they don't have the ability to understand what you're trying to tell them. Yeah, so I think that, in my mind, that's part of the evolution of the story, is that they go from the early humans learning how to use tools to the humans becoming tools for their creation, basically.
Yeah, and I think that is an excellent point. But the tools fight back, and and that's another, and that's considering what we're talking about in modern days, talking about artificial intelligence and everything, which I think is a little overblown. But don't hold,
who knows at this point?
Yeah, but the threat of artificial intelligence, over our lives and everything like that, and I put threat in quotation marks, but. HAL was one of the early warning signs of that. So that's, kudos to Arthur C. Clarke for seeing that far into the future. And a good point that once humans got in the way of the mission, the humans became disposable tools. Not needed tools, but disposable tools. So I've always found that a little interesting. And then the final act was the last evolution of man to Starchild. And this was always the part that I had the hardest grasping because, the first three acts were relatively easy to grasp. And by the way, we're going to pass the 30-minute point. So if you're looking for this on TikTok, it's not going to happen.
That's okay.
Not big, because you can't do this movie. This movie is so much fun to talk about.
Maybe a full hour this time.
Well, anyway. So we got the fourth act, which is the fourth story that, I'm just guessing here that Sir Arthur, put together. And this is the, when Frank Poole discovers the monolith around Jupiter and takes the pod out to the monolith and whoops. Right. Oh, it's full of stars. My God, it's full of stars.
My God, it's full of stars.
My God, it's full of stars.
That, for a movie with little dialogue, that line stands out because of the way that scene happens. I get goosebumps just thinking about it because, as we mentioned, very young when this movie came out. Seeing it in the theater for the first time at 5, I did not have the capability to make any sense of anything that was happening.
In the fourth act.
In any of the acts, honestly, because, I didn't have a background in history at that point or anything. So it was just pretty pictures on a big screen for me. The moment he said, "My God, it's full of stars," that was probably the one thing that little 5-year-old me could understand. Oof.
Yeah. And so, and it's that step in evolution that he takes to the next step, and then he finds himself in the bedroom with his spacesuit, and he ages and evolves, and it's frankly it's amazing, and I appreciate the optimistic view that Arthur C. Clarke gives to our future,
right.
But cynical me I have my doubts, and I even talk about those doubts in this book here,
right.
at length. In this series, the future of humanity is perhaps the background of this entire series, the
right.
future of humanity, and whether or not even humanity deserves a future. Arthur C. Clarke in 2001 answers that question. Not only does it deserve a future, but it will have a future,
right.
and become something greater than we are by ourselves. And okay, cool.
And I think now that you mention that, the fourth act has always been the one that I have not been able to understand, but now that I've got a little more age and maturity behind me, I think, and based on what you've just said, we're not really meant to understand it. I think it's showing us that time is not linear, that we are more than we think we are, and that, given the right circumstances, given the right ingredients, we will evolve to become what we were meant to be.
Yeah, but it's clearly, the movie also shows that we are our greatest enemy. We are our own greatest enemy.
Yes.
There comes a point. There's a tipping point that that society evolves.
Yes.
Then devolves.
Right.
And we've done this through human history. I mean, who amongst us has not thought of the Dark Ages? Which was the fall of European history. We don't talk about if you were white in America, you didn't learn about any other kind of history. But there are numerous examples where human civilization, human society evolves up to a point that it devolves. All empires fall. All empires fall.
Yes.
And don't get me started on the current empire, but all empires fall in time.
Right.
And then, but that reset point where it gets back to where it starts evolving again, that is a dark time. And what Arthur C. Clarke, I think, is saying in that fourth act is that the monolith and the people, for lack of a better phrase, the people that created the monolith are here to help us not only evolve, but to help us to avoid that next version of de-evolution. Maybe.
Well, and you pointed out you have quite a bit of that in Serving Salvation, that point where, and I think what you're alluding to maybe is we reach a point in civilization where maybe we get a little bored, where everything's going along pretty well. We've got things that help keep us healthy, and things are prosperous. We have food, we have shelter, and there's a certain group of people that wants more.
Yeah.
And those people that want more tend to bring down the people who are still struggling to survive a little bit, because there's always that element of society. So society as a whole is doing well, but there's always that undercurrent.
Yeah.
And it takes the tipping point of the few, getting greedy and taking in all the resources, that really pushes the rest of us down into that quagmire.
Yeah, it's a struggle, and we don't want to get too caught up, because this is a political free
right,
podcast.
But we're talking about
but we have to talk
evolution.
about. We're not talking about. Well, we are in a way talking about evolution as a species, but we're talking more about society evolution, cultural evolution, and Arthur C. Clarke paints a very positive.
Right.
Going from what's happened around the waterhole to the rest of the movie, where it says, evolution is possible, even though we take back steps when we allow our machines to murder, but we could still be better than who we are. And you know, in the 60s when this movie was created, it was another dark time because America was coming apart, because of the war in Vietnam and the protests and the assassinations that were unthinkable even 10 years ago, 10 years prior to the 60s. So people thought things were coming apart, and so this movie came in and said, hey, you know, we have a future if you keep the faith.
Now that you mention it, though, and the turmoil of the 1960s, which as kids, I don't know how much of that we actually understood, because we saw I remember seeing the happy hippie side where, you know, peace, love, and all that good stuff. This movie itself is something of a throwback that the cast is not diverse.
No.
The cast is very white. It kind of harkens back to what you were saying about us learning white history. So
and just very quickly, it was reflective of NASA. Because NASA, the leading space organization of the world at the time, very white. Right.
So, you know, without really overtly talking about things like, you know, the civil rights movement or anything at that time, you know, it was, I'm guessing they're just talking about what's going on in the course of the Arthur C. Clarke stories. You know, looking back on it from a historical context, because we have more than 50 years now, which kind of puts it in that historical context, that we can see that it was a product of the times, that there was an undercurrent of darkness in society, but there was also the hope for the future.
The hope for the future.
We're looking at people who are thinking that, you know, more people are going to have rights, you know, diverse people of different genders and things like that. So the movie itself is kind of now a reflection of a time long gone, even though it is a hopeful picture of what we could become.
Yeah, it's one of those very complex movies, which is, as you said, it's a snapshot of the time where it was very white, very male. And very educated, you know, very white male educated folks, white people of privilege. But it was also a movie of hope. It was saying that this is what we are capable of. This is, you know, not just with the Act Two, whereas the space station and the moon trip, and you know the wonderful spaceship of Discovery, which is just a wonderful piece of, you know, engineering. But it's saying that, hey, there is a future out there if we believe, and so. But you know, it's going back. You know, we said this before. Speaking from a writing point of view, there's a lot of messages that Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick wanted to get in, and they packed it in this movie, and they did a wonderful job of it. If you give it a chance, and I don't know if modern audiences, you know, they want their CGI, they want their action sequences, they want their lasers, they want all of these, their space explosions. None of that happens in this. This movie from beginning to end is all practical special effects, you know, physical practical special effects.
It's also very, like you mentioned, the lasers and the action sequences. It's rather slow moving, and I think of the scene. I believe it's in the second act with the rotating axis, or was that Discovery, where you get that very beautiful ballet of the flight attendant for.
Was that
Act Two?
That's Act Two.
Okay, so it's a very beautiful slow sequence where even the rotation to create the gravity is happening slowly, and I don't know that, like you said, modern audiences might take it to be a little bit too slow and boring, but if you take the time, it really gets into you. You kind of absorb it, I think, better than you do some of those harried action scenes.
Let me clarify what you're saying. The audiences of the 60s and the 70s would appeal to them more than it would probably appeal to an audience in the 2020s. It would be and I hate to say it like this, but I think 2001, if it was created today, would be more of a student film project out of a university like UCLA or USC versus, something
kind of
that
an art film.
Yeah, so an art film
Yeah.
versus something that a major studio, which a major studio was behind 2001.
Yes.
Which is kind of amazing considering some of the movies that were coming out at that time. Remember, this was, cowboy films were coming towards the end, and they were making that shift to, towards the 70s, and Star Wars was literally on the horizon. But it's hard, for a movie studio, a major movie studio, to do 2001 at any time. It's kind of, wow, nicely done, folks.
Well, it was a big risk because I'm sure a lot of people saw the movie as an experience more than going to see a movie. It was a big experience. It was very visually stunning. As I mentioned, the sound system in the theater would have been better than what you had at home, even though by our modern standards it was pretty low, low budget. But thinking about it, I don't think mass audiences, and I didn't look at the box office for 2001. I don't think this really would have appealed to mass audiences because of the lack of dialogue. It doesn't seem like it's a linear story progression. It seems like it's, and you have to really put a lot of time and thought into the movie, and I'm still absorbing it more than 50 years later.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and flip on that. I'm also going to point out that during the 1960s, America was space happy. So anything happening with space was going to draw. The thing is I wonder if it got second. That's the question. I think that people, because of the advertising at the time, hey, 2001: A Space Odyssey is its full title. 2001: A Space Odyssey is how it was advertised, how it was labeled, and so I would say that probably what it did is it probably got a lot of people there for the first time. But I also think that probably people kind of probably walked out and it's like
that's what I'm thinking and that's kind of what I was going where I was going with that is that they would have gone for curiosity's sake, like you mentioned, space happy, but I think staying there to actually experience the full movie, they may have gotten bored, and there are no cell phones or anything to play with while you're sitting there. You're not going to sit there and complete the movie because it's like, I have better things to do with my time.
I wonder, there's an old adage that one of my writing instructors taught when I was at the university. And they said, always write for people who move their lips when they read. And this movie is not for those folks. No, this movie is not for those folks. So, but let's talk about let's wrap this up with the writing. Is the writing superior? Now, for folks like us, yes, it is super. We obviously are in that demographic that 2001: A Space Odyssey appeals to, because we like the writing, we like science fiction, we like to be challenged by a movie. It appeals to us on so many different levels.
Right.
But the writing, it's tight. It appeals to us because it speaks to us, as if we have a brain. Now, I'm not saying we have a brain because obviously that's questionable, but it's a book that assumes that it's a book and a movie that assumes that its audience has a brain.
Right.
Not people who move their lips when they read, and so who move their lips when they read. So it's interesting that way.
Well, and this just reminded me also that this would have been in the same time period that Star Trek was big.
Yeah.
The original classic series. So Star Trek also, even though it was billed as Wagon Train to the Stars and people watched it a lot for, the goofy action elements of it, it was a very thoughtful TV show. So there was definitely a subset of the population, I guess, that was so interested in the evolution of the human race into a space race that even with Star Trek, there were kind of nuances, there were allusions.
The Shakespearean. There was a lot of Shakespearean influence in Star Trek. I mean, they named episodes after Shakespeare.
Yes.
So,
but it's speaking to the same audience basically, even though they were filmed very differently because Star Trek had no budget whatsoever.
No.
So it's definitely, there was a subset of the population at that time that was very into this kind of thing, and they were the intended audience, even though it was mass released. And I wonder, if, like you said, people went in there because of the space happy environment that we were living in at the time, but how many of those people did walk out because they got halfway through the movie and thought, oh my God, what is this?
And that's a shame too, because time and history has shown that, and as you said, it's a historical film now. It's 50 years old. As time has proven that it is a movie by which other movies are measured when it comes to similar things. Not even its sequel, when it was it 2010.
2010.
Was barely a blip. They tried 2010 when I saw it and I read the book was an effort to try to explain,
recapture. I think.
Not recapture, but not only recapture it, but explain what happened in 2001. And it's like, you know what, just let it go.
And I think it had to be left to the viewer or the reader to fill in the gaps and understand it on their own terms. And by trying to explain it, hitting somebody in the face with something, this is what was meant, doesn't work.
Okay. We are past 45 minutes on this podcast, and I don't even feel like that, because it really flew. And I don't know if we've even scratched the surface, or I don't even think, I think that as the viewers of 2001, we know enough to be dangerous, but we don't have, we
haven't done any in-depth study on the filmmaking or Arthur C. Clarke's intentions.
We could go on and on and on and talk about the effect of the effects on movies from, obviously the 2001 had a direct impact of the effects on Star Wars.
True.
So we could talk about that. We could talk about the Starchild model, or that how man becomes God, or humanity becomes God if it allows itself, but we're not going to do that. We're
not into the philosophy behind it.
But it would be interesting to go there, and maybe we'll go do a part 2 of this at time. But I think that we've hit pretty much every point that I think that we wanted to hit. Is there something that we left undone?
No, I think you kind of started to talk about the writing and how tight it was and everything. Is this the type of writing that you aspire to?
Oh, I think that everybody should try to aspire to this higher form of writing. Again, while keeping in mind that it may not be incredibly appealing to the mass audience, but I think it's worth trying to touch the face of God. I think it's worth trying to touch the face of God. And then, settling for Earth. Okay. I think that we've got this. So what are your thoughts on 2001? Have you seen 2001? Go see 2001 if you haven't seen it. And let us know what you think. I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if we were to do a Google search that there are college film classes
I'm sure,
that center on 2001, the making of it and the presentation of it, the after effects of it. I absolutely think that that's a possibility. Okay, I can't think of anything else.
No, as you said, we could probably go on and on about this because it's a very dear subject to us both.
It's fun.
It's kind of recapturing our youth in a way, the excitement of that time. So, and I think we do that with our writing. When we start a new writing project, I think we're trying to recapture the excitement of something that we did in our youth. So.
Okay, so for episode 201,
excuse me.
No worries. For episode 201, we talked about 2001. I don't know what we're going to do for episode 202, but this has been fun. So anyway, go check out the movie. Go check out Surfing Salvation, which has some elements of it. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. Just check them out. Buy the book, please. And we'll be back probably at our regular schedule on Sunday next week. Anything else we're going to talk about?
I don't think so. We have a lot coming up, so follow along, especially in 2025, which, talking about 2001, we're going into 2025. Oh
wow,
my gosh.
Quarter of the 21st century. 25 years of the 21st century. Okay. All right, over there is Cece.
And over there is JT.
We had a wonderful time. We had a wonderful long discussion. We hope that you hung in there. Y'all take care of yourself, and we'll see you all next week. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.